Disclaimer: this story contains mature themes intended for adult viewers. Viewer discretion is advised. The fight had drained every bit of strength from me. My throat still burned from words I wished I'd never said, and my eyes felt heavy from crying too much, too hard. I sat curled at one end of the living room couch, hugging a cushion to my chest, trying to steady my breathing. The house was quiet in that uncomfortable way, too silent for a place that had just held shouting. That's when I noticed him standing near the doorway. He hadn't said a word yet. He just looked at me, concern written plainly across his face, but there was something else beneath it, something unreadable. Our eyes met, and for a second, neither of us moved. My heartbeat picked up for reasons I couldn't explain. I looked away first, embarrassed by how exposed I felt, like he could see straight through the cracks I was trying to hide. "You okay?" he asked softly. I nodded even though it wasn't true. He stepped closer, close enough that I could feel the warmth of him without being touched. When he sat on the arm of the couch, his knee brushed mine, accidental, probably, but the contact sent a strange jolt through me. I told myself I was just tired. Emotional. Vulnerable. He didn't pull away. Instead, he offered a faint smile, the kind that felt personal, almost intimate. "You don't have to pretend with me," he said, his voice low, steady. The way he said it made my chest tighten. I laughed quietly, a nervous sound, and teased him about being dramatic. He chuckled, but his eyes never left mine. The air between us grew thick, heavy with things unsaid. Eventually, exhaustion won. My head tipped back against the cushion, eyes fluttering shut. I was vaguely aware of him shifting, of a blanket being pulled over me, of a presence staying when it didn't have to. Sleep took me before I could question any of it. When I stirred, it wasn't morning light that woke me, it was awareness. A warmth. A closeness that hadn't been there before. I didn't open my eyes right away. I felt his breath near my ear, slow and careful, and a gentle pressure at my side, as if he was testing whether I was awake. My pulse raced. Then came the lightest touch at my waist, barely there, sending electricity straight through me. His voice dropped to a whisper. "I know what you really need." And in that moment, I wasn't sure if I wanted to pull away or turn toward him. The days after that night felt heavier, like everything familiar had shifted just enough to make me uneasy. My marriage had been cracking long before the fight, quiet dinners, conversations that felt rehearsed, affection replaced by obligation. We lived in the same house but in different emotional worlds, pretending routine was the same as closeness. He had seen it long before I admitted it to myself. We'd known each other for years, always circling the edges of each other's lives, shared holidays, casual conversations, harmless jokes. I'd never looked at him that way before, or at least that's what I told myself. But lately, I noticed things, how he listened without interrupting, how his eyes softened when I spoke, how he seemed to sense my moods before I did. The morning after I fell asleep on the couch, I woke alone. A blanket neatly tucked around me. A glass of water on the table. No note. No proof it had meant anything at all, except the way my skin still felt warm where his presence had been. At breakfast, our eyes met across the kitchen. Just for a second. He gave me a small nod, polite, distant. It should have been a relief. Instead, it felt like a question hanging in the air. Later that week, my husband and I argued again. Not loudly this time, worse than shouting. Flat voices. Sharp silences. When he left the room, I didn't cry. I just sat there, numb, staring at nothing. That's when I heard footsteps pause behind me. "You don't have to carry this alone," he said quietly. I turned, surprised by how close he was standing. Not touching. Just close enough that I could feel his presence grounding me. My chest tightened. I wanted to step back. I didn't. You always say that, I replied, forcing a half smile. And you never believe me, he said gently. There was no accusation in his voice. Just truth. In the moments that followed, nothing dramatic happened, no sudden moves, no crossed lines. But the tension was undeniable. When he reached past me to grab a mug, his arm brushed mine, and neither of us pretended it hadn't. My breath caught. His jaw tightened. Then he stepped away, creating distance that somehow made everything feel louder. At night, I replayed our conversations instead of sleeping. Wondered when comfort had started to feel like something else. Wondered when being seen had become so intoxicating. I told myself it was just emotional closeness. That loneliness makes you imagine things. But every time he looked at me, it felt deliberate. Every pause between us stretched a little too long. Every almost touch lingered in my thoughts long after it ended. One evening, as the house settled into quiet again, we found ourselves alone in the living room. No arguments this time. No tears. Just silence, thick and charged. He sat across from me, elbows on his knees, studying the floor like he was choosing his words carefully. When he finally looked up, his eyes locked onto mine, intense and unguarded. There are things we don't say, he murmured. Because once we do, everything changes. My heart raced. I swallowed hard, unsure whether I wanted him to stop or continue. And as he leaned slightly forward, closing the space between us, I realized I was standing on the edge of something I couldn't undo. The tension didn't fade with time, it sharpened. I noticed it the first night my husband came home late, smelling faintly of someone else's perfume, laughing at messages he didn't bother to hide anymore. I watched him move through the house like I was part of the furniture, and something inside me hardened. When he brushed past me without a glance, I felt invisible in my own life. But someone else noticed. He was in the kitchen when my husband finally went to bed, irritation still buzzing under my skin. I poured myself a glass of water I didn't need, just to have something to do with my hands. He leaned against the counter across from me, arms crossed, eyes dark with something that looked dangerously close to anger, on my behalf. He doesn't see you, he said quietly. The words hit harder than the fight ever had. I looked up, startled. You shouldn't say that. Someone has to, he replied. His jaw tightened, like he was holding back more than words. For a moment, jealousy flickered across his face, raw, unguarded. It surprised me more than anything. The idea that he cared enough to feel it made my pulse race. I should have shut it down. I should have walked away. I didn't. Instead, I asked, why does it bother you so much? The silence that followed was loud. He stepped closer, stopping just short of touching me. I could feel the heat of him, the restraint in the way his hands curled slightly at his sides. His eyes searched mine, as if weighing the cost of honesty. Because watching you be ignored feels wrong, he said. And because I've been trying not to want things I shouldn't. My breath caught. The confession lingered between us, heavy and dangerous. I felt torn, between loyalty and longing, between what was expected and what was pulling at me with quiet insistence. Footsteps sounded upstairs. My husband turning in his sleep. We both froze. That was when I realized how close we were, close enough that one step would change everything. Close enough that I could see the conflict in his eyes mirroring my own. He reached out, then stopped himself, fingers hovering near my wrist before slowly pulling back. I don't want to be the reason you break, he said, voice low. But I don't know how much longer I can pretend this doesn't exist. Neither did I. As I stood there, heart pounding, I understood the real danger wasn't what might happen, it was how much I wanted it to. The house felt different that night, too quiet, like it was holding its breath. My husband was away again, another late meeting that neither of us questioned anymore. The excuse lingered in the air like a bad habit. I told myself I'd use the time to sleep early, to reset, to think clearly. Instead, I found myself pacing the hallway, drawn toward the one room where a light was still on. He was in the living room, sitting on the edge of the couch, sleeves rolled up, phone forgotten in his hand. When he looked up and saw me, something shifted in his expression, relief, maybe, or something more dangerous. "I didn't expect you," he said quietly. "I couldn't sleep," I replied, stopping a few steps away. The space between us felt intentional now, charged. Neither of us moved to close it, yet neither stepped back. We talked about small things at first, work, the weather, anything safe. But every sentence felt like a detour around the truth. When I sat down at the other end of the couch, our knees angled toward each other without thinking. My heart raced at the smallest movements, the way he leaned forward when I spoke, the way his gaze lingered a second too long before looking away. Then the power flickered. The lights went out, plunging the room into darkness, broken only by moonlight through the window. I gasped softly, instinctively reaching out. His hand found mine at the same time. The contact was brief, but neither of us let go right away. "You okay?" he asked, closer than before. "Yeah," I whispered, though my pulse said otherwise. We stood there, hands still touching, the silence loud with everything we'd been avoiding. I could feel the tension in him, the restraint in the way his fingers tightened just slightly before loosening again. He stepped closer, not quite invading my space, but close enough that I could feel his breath when he spoke. "This has gone too far," he murmured. "Or maybe it hasn't gone far enough." My chest tightened. I looked up at him, searching his face in the dim light. The honesty there made it harder to pretend. Harder to walk away. "If we keep standing here," I said softly, "something's going to happen." He didn't deny it. Instead, he lifted his hand, slow, deliberate, and paused, waiting, hovering just inches from my face, giving me time to stop him. I didn't. Just as his fingers brushed a strand of hair from my cheek, footsteps sounded outside. A car door. An engine cutting off. We froze. His eyes locked onto mine, intense, unresolved, and full of everything we hadn't said yet. The sound of the car door slamming echoed through the house like a warning. We pulled apart instantly, the moment shattering as the front door opened. My husband stepped inside, loosening his tie, already talking about traffic and meetings as if nothing in the world had changed. I stood frozen near the couch, heart pounding so loudly I was sure he could hear it. He glanced at me briefly, distracted, then disappeared down the hallway. Only when the bedroom door closed did I let myself breathe. I turned toward him, my hands shaking. He looked just as unsettled, running a hand through his hair, jaw clenched. The closeness we'd shared moments ago now felt dangerous, fragile, like glass about to break. "That was too close," I whispered. He nodded. "This can't keep happening like this." But neither of us moved away. That was when my phone buzzed in my hand. A message lit up the screen, one I hadn't been meant to see. My husband's name. A preview line that wasn't meant for me. "I missed last night. Same place tomorrow?" The room tilted. My breath caught as realization crashed over me. All the late nights. The distance. The excuses. The betrayal I'd felt without proof finally had a shape. I laughed softly, a broken sound, and pressed the phone to my chest. "He's having an affair," I said, more to myself than to him. His expression shifted, shock, then something like grim understanding. "I suspected," he admitted quietly. "I just didn't want to be right." The honesty in his voice undid me. Tears filled my eyes, not just from hurt, but from the strange clarity settling in. I wasn't imagining my loneliness. I wasn't wrong for feeling unseen. He checked out a long time ago, I said. I just stayed. He stepped closer, not to comfort me physically, but to be present. You deserve more than silence and excuses. The words felt like permission I hadn't known I was waiting for. In that moment, something between us shifted, not into recklessness, but into truth. The attraction we'd been dancing around finally stood in the open, stripped of excuses. It wasn't about replacing anyone. It was about being honest about what had grown in the space neglect had left behind. I don't want to be a secret, I said, voice steady despite the tears. And I won't be someone's escape. He met my gaze, serious. Then don't be. If anything happens from here, it has to be real. And it has to be chosen. Footsteps sounded again down the hallway. My husband's voice called my name. We exchanged one last look, charged, unresolved, and full of consequences. I slipped the phone into my pocket and turned toward the hallway, knowing the next conversation would change everything. Behind me, he stayed where he was. The words I'd been holding back finally spilled out the moment my husband stepped into the living room. "What's going on?" he asked, eyes flicking between me and him, sensing the tension instantly. I didn't soften my voice. I didn't look away. For the first time in a long while, I didn't protect his comfort at the expense of my truth. "I saw the message," I said, lifting my phone. "I know about her." The silence that followed was crushing. His face drained of color. He opened his mouth, then closed it again, scrambling for excuses that suddenly sounded hollow even to him. "It's not what you think," he began, the familiar lie falling flat the moment it left his lips. I laughed bitterly. "That's the problem. It's exactly what I think." Emotion cracked through me then, anger, grief, humiliation, all colliding at once. My hands trembled, but my voice stayed firm. "I begged you to see me. To hear me. And instead, you chose to disappear." He tried to defend himself, blaming stress, distance, misunderstandings. But the words blurred together, meaningless now. I realized something in that moment. I wasn't fighting to save us anymore. I was fighting to save myself. "I'm done pretending this is normal," I said quietly. "I deserve honesty. Even if it hurts." Behind me, he remained silent, respectful, giving me space to face what was mine alone to confront. His presence wasn't an escape, it was support. And that difference mattered. My husband finally sighed, shoulders slumping. "I don't know when it went wrong," he admitted. "But I know I handled it badly." "That doesn't fix it," I replied. "It just explains it." The truth settled between us like a final chapter closing. We agreed, painfully, reluctantly, that space was necessary. That whatever we'd been clinging to had already broken long before tonight. When he walked away to pack a bag, the house felt impossibly quiet. I sank onto the couch, the weight of it all hitting me at once. Tears came freely now, not just for what I'd lost, but for what I'd ignored for so long. I pressed my hands to my face, breathing through the ache. He sat beside me, close but careful. "You were brave," he said softly. I shook my head. I was terrified. Sometimes that's the same thing. I looked at him then, really looked at him, not as a temptation, not as a secret, but as someone who had seen me when I felt invisible. The attraction was still there, undeniable, but it felt different now, cleaner, grounded in honesty instead of stolen moments. "I don't know what happens next," I admitted. He met my gaze, calm and sincere. "Neither do I. But whatever it is, it should be chosen. Not hidden." The words felt like a promise without pressure. As the night deepened, I realized this wasn't the end of a story, it was the end of a lie. And for the first time in years, the future felt uncertain, but real. The morning light poured gently through the living room windows, soft and golden. The chaos of yesterday had faded, leaving a quiet stillness that felt almost sacred. I sat on the couch, wrapped in a blanket, sipping my coffee, the warmth grounding me. He entered quietly, careful not to startle me, carrying his own cup. For a moment, we simply watched each other, smiles shy but genuine. No words were necessary, everything we'd felt, every confession, every tension, had found a place between us. The air was lighter, free of pretense or hidden secrets. He sat beside me, careful yet confident, close enough to feel the warmth radiating from him. Our shoulders touched, and for the first time, it didn't feel dangerous, it felt right. I tilted my head toward him, meeting his eyes. There was humor in the glance, gratitude, and a quiet relief that we had arrived here, to honesty and connection. You know, he said softly, we've been through a lot, but I wouldn't change this. Not because of the mistakes, but because it brought me to you. I felt my heart swell, a gentle ache of happiness I hadn't realized I was missing. I think I needed to see everything clearly, I whispered. To understand what matters, who really matters. He reached for my hand, intertwining our fingers naturally. It was a simple gesture, but it carried years of unspoken understanding, longing, and trust. The closeness wasn't about desire, it was about safety, companionship, and a bond that had been forged through the storm. We laughed quietly together at a small joke, and the sound felt like music after months of silence. The tension that had haunted us melted with every glance, every shared breath. In that moment, I realized the heart wants honesty above all else, and love can bloom where truth is allowed to grow. He brushed a strand of hair from my face, his fingers lingering gently. So, can we start over? Properly this time? I smiled, leaning just a little closer. Yes, I said. But this time, no hiding. Only honesty. And as we sat there, watching the morning light fill the room, I knew that this was a beginning, not just of love, but of trust, connection, and the promise that we could face anything together. The future was uncertain, yes, but for the first time, it felt full of hope, warmth, and a love that was real.